Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to the Imago Nutrition Podcast. My name is Mark. I am here with Danielle, our registered dietitian extraordinaire, my business partner and sister-in-law. Excited to get into kind of a distillation episode, if you will. We both watched a seminar from the American Academy of Pediatrics about obesity related to both adults and children. And so we waded through almost an hour presentation that included some Q&A. And what we're looking to do, because the theme of our podcast is to answer questions and give practical nutrition strategies to help you and your family flourish. So what we're hoping to do today is have done our homework through a lot of medical terms and heady insights and research and peer-reviewed backing. We are going to attempt to give you, listeners, an introduction, just an introduction, not an entire dissertation by any means, but an introduction to better understanding some of the complexities of obesity in adults and children. Now, right off the bat, a lot of people say, well, that's obesity. A lot of times what we think is obesity is at a distance. It's perhaps morbid obesity or severe obesity, someone that's, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds overweight. But obesity actually impacts a lot more people and children than we think. And so it's actually closer to home than most people realize. And so what we want to do is kind of distill this seminar down to some kind of actionable understandings, if you will. And kind of with the goal, Danielle, we talked just briefly before, we clicked record and we wanted to define our goal for this episode. And it was really to help you understand what to focus on. And what you can focus on is really what you can control. Okay. So there's so many different considerations when it comes to obesity, but as parents and or adult individuals, I think our goal is to help you focus on what we can control. Okay. And so as I often say is controlling the controllables, right? There's things in life you can't, and there's things in life that you can. Okay. And a lot of times people get discouraged from, working on something with their health because they feel that it's outside their control, when some things might be outside their control, but some things are within their control. And so it's not all or nothing. It's not binary. And so we're going to come to this huge, huge topic of obesity, both for adults and children, but with the goal of equipping you. And by the way, even if you don't, you're not someone with obesity or with a child with obesity, there's going to be a lot of practical application here to inform just healthy lifestyle in general, perhaps so that there is not a chance for this down the road. Or if you are someone that does struggle with obesity or excessive body fat, or a child that has excessive body fat, we're going to give you also some very practical strategies to, again, focus on what you can control. So with that, Danielle, I'll set it up real fast, but I want to actually turn to you to set the stage. And so again, I mentioned this was a seminar that we viewed from the American Academy of Pediatrics, about an hour long. The title of it was The Interconnection Between Obesity, Physiology, Genetics, and the Environment. So you can imagine, even in the hour, it was hard for the presenter, very, very smart woman, to go into much depth because this is so complicated. Right. It was an in-depth presentation for sure, but you could spend on every one of these topics. You could spend days trying to peel back all the layers. Right. So Dr. Fatima Cody Stanford was the presenter. I became aware of her, I think about a year ago. She was on 60 Minutes. And so if you Google 60 Minutes, I think it was January 2023. I know she was on 60 Minutes speaking about this. So I think her prominence in the conversation has really risen. She has dedicated her career to understanding and helping people with obesity. And so she's a doctor and professor. So she's a doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a professor at Harvard Medical School, incredibly sharp woman, super, super smart. And so it was fun to listen to her. And so again, with the goal of kind of helping us focus on what we can control, Danielle. And again, we're not going to go through everything they talked about. We're going to touch on some key kind of themes and kind of summarize what was discussed. But only because we want to help you get to that point of, okay, well, what do I do with this information? Thanks, Mark and Danielle, for watching the presentation and then bringing up some of the themes that were discussed, but what do I do with that? So with that, Danielle, I'll toss it over to you if you want to kind of set up the stage for us and talk about, kind of obesity in general, maybe the prevalence, kind of what we're dealing with when we talk about this topic.
Yeah. So one thing that was really interesting that she mentioned was that the pediatric obesity trends follow pretty closely after the adult obesity trends. And so she did not have the data for, the pandemic. She had a touch of information about it influencing the youngest, the pandemic influencing the youngest kids more. The weight trends did go up, but she didn't have the exact trend, the exact numbers. But she mentioned that obesity is higher among boys than girls. That between the age range of 2 to 19 is what we're looking at for children. And the obesity rates increase with age. So the highest rates of obesity are those 12 to 19-year-old boys, and then followed by the 12 to 19-year-old girls. So up to 22.5% for the boys and 20% for girls.
Mm-hmm.
So there are also obesity rate differences among ethnicities. And so the highest in boys that are Mexican Americans and highest in girls that are non-Hispanic Black. So that is kind of the trends that we have as far as the obesity in children. So.
Yeah, and she also had mentioned, I think, on the adult side, and this was data pulled from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And so I don't believe we have newer data. This is from 1999 to 2018. I think we're waiting. I know this seminar was from last year. I think we're waiting on some updated data. So if you're listening to this and a new report has been, released, don't hold us to this. But at the time of the presentation, we were talking about obesity in adults having risen from 30.5% to 42.4%. That is a positive variance of 39%. So it's increased by 39% from 1999, the year I graduated high school, to 2018. Okay. And then in severe obesity, okay, that number has risen from 4.7% to 9.2%, which is a 95, almost 96% increase since 1999. Okay. So all that's to say, and again, from 1999 to 2018, that is just about 20 years. Okay. So within 20 years, you're seeing a 39% increase in obesity and a 96, almost 96% increase in severe obesity. Of course, there are lots of implications for this, for children, for adults, in terms of health outcomes. I don't want to just rattle off a list to try to scare people, but you can imagine everything from for kids, psychosocial, neurological, pulmonary, musculoskeletal. There are just so many consequences of childhood obesity. And then for adults as well, the health outcomes deteriorate rapidly as obesity continues to be prevalent. So we'll just kind of leave it there. It is a problem. Okay. And, on the adult side of things, Danielle is far more in touch with working with children. I deal almost exclusively, and when it comes to weight loss with my clients, at least, it's exclusively adults. And so just one thing to note is that when we talk about obesity, as an adult now, right, we'll talk here in a second about screening. I look to the American Council on Exercise for Adults for what I would consider, or what I would call, obesity level body fat. So for an adult male, obesity level body fat. So what does obesity mean, right? Is kind of the question. For males, the American Council on Exercise would say that body fat percentage 25% and above is actually obesity level body fat. For females, it is 32% and above. And again, because what we see is that's what starts to set in motion a whole host of negative health outcomes at that level body fat. So that's kind of how, in my mind, I'm thinking about the term obesity or obesity level body fat when it comes to adults. But Danielle, one of the things she also touched on was the screening for children. That does not necessarily apply to children, and we're not proposing you need to go get your child body fat tested or anything like that. So talk to us a little bit about what was presented and how we think about screening for children, which from a physician standpoint is actually pretty simplistic.
So the screening for children and adolescents is based on those growth charts. So hopefully your pediatrician is plotting your child's growth each visit. So for underweight, it's less than the 5th percentile. For healthy weight, it's 5th to less than 85th percentile. For overweight, it's 85th percentile to less than 95th percentile. And for class 1 obesity, it's equal to or greater than 95th, but less than 120th percentile. And then it goes for class 2, it's 120th percentile to 140th percentile. And class 3 is greater than or equal to the 140th percentile. So it is just super important. What was really profound in the lecture was that she showed a picture of a child that looked of normal body weight, and that child was considered, I think, class 1 obesity. It is really important that your doctor and you are looking at those growth charts and not just by physical appearance. So the practical reason for that is not just to get a definition, but to make changes as early as possible, because that makes it 100% easier. When you wait even just a couple of years, the amount of pounds that continue to, be above the normal, it just makes it that much harder. So I think that would be the reason I wanted to point that out, is just to start earlier than later and make sure you're looking and your pediatrician is looking at those growth charts.
And we're going to get to some of those things too. So, if that's you, if you're a parent and you've got some concerns, stick with us. Okay. We're going to work through some of these topics to, again, help you kind of focus on what you can control in that regard. And we are going to get to some really practical strategies to help you, because again, I don't have the stats right off the top of my head. I forgot to put them in my notes, to be honest, but the stats on children that become teenagers become adults that continue to be overweight or have obesity level body fat. Those statistics are pretty significant. And so this is not something that from a child perspective, and we as parents, who love our kids so much, will do anything for our kids. A lot of times we just think it's something that will kind of work itself out, right? Well, they're still growing. Statistically, that is not predominantly the case. It actually begins to compound year after year. It doesn't tend to, on its own, work itself out without a little bit of focus. And we're not talking anything highly regimented. We're talking very loving and practical ways that you can help guide your child in that. So we're definitely going to get to some of that. So that's super helpful. So again, the big key takeaway there is to ask that question of your pediatrician, stay in that contact with your doctor. That's what they are there for. All right. And so we'll talk through a couple considerations. Again, this was a forum of doctors, by the way, right? So we're in the American Academy of Pediatrics. Danielle and I are listening in on this seminar. And so this is a doctor speaking to doctors. All right. So there is a concerted effort out there to remind doctors that we have to keep these considerations because there are health ramifications down the road for these patients. Okay. And so that was the forum in which this was discussed. And so we wanted to, again, help translate that to you. So next in that presentation, or at least kind of the next big block, was no surprise, nutrition was addressed. And obviously there are lots of things. By the way, we should say at the top of this, there were no less than 7 major contributors to, obesity, right? So there was biological/medical, there was social, there was food and beverage behavior, right, /environment, psychological factors, environmental pressures, like things like physical activity, maternal and developmental, economic. We're not going to go into all of these, but just know that there's no less than, by this presentation, 7 major contributors. And within all of those, there are many finer tuned contributing factors, right? There's a lot of things that go into social influence, right? It's not just like one thing, it's a lot of things. So all that's to say, again, very, very multifactorial, which we have to understand and appreciate to, again, begin to kind of think through, okay, but then what can I focus on? What can I control? Okay, because you can't always control all the things, and that's okay. So with that, I thought I'll just kind of bring up like maybe one nugget from the nutrition side because it was brought up in the presentation. It's one of my favorite studies. It was done back in 2019. And so Dr. Stanford did bring up what I call Hall et al. So the researcher's last name is Hall, et al. Means others. In 2019, there was a study. The technical title of the study, if you want to look it up for yourself, is Ultra-Processed Diets Cause Excess Calorie Intake and Weight Gain. This was an inpatient randomized controlled trial, which is among the highest form of research available, okay, of ad libitum food intake. What that means, and we've talked about this a bit in some episodes in the past as a refresher, this is essentially a randomized controlled trial where they brought in participants in the study into a metabolic ward that is highly controlled. These are not people that are being studied out in the wild or out in real life. They have been brought into a metabolic ward so that their nutrition intake can be highly, highly controlled. It's kind of a beautiful study by design, okay? So in the first half, people were given access to ultra-processed foods. And what they generally saw is that people were over-consuming calories by about 500 per day. Okay, now what does that generally lead to? It can lead to consistent week-over-week weight gain. If you're consuming 500 calories more than your maintenance weight or your maintenance calories. Second half of the study, and ad libitum means that they could eat as much as they want. What they did not control was how much they could eat. That was actually the point of the research, was to say, hey, you can eat as much as you want. So they gave them access to highly processed foods. They started over-consuming calories. We know why this is the case. They weren't satisfied. They weren't full. They're super tasty. They're super salty, super sweet. All those delicious, highly processed foods that don't satisfy us, they lead to us over-consuming them to try to satisfy the body. Then in the back half of the study, what they did, same style, ad libitum, you can still eat as much as you want, but they only gave them access to, the control point was they only gave them access to minimally processed foods or unprocessed foods, right? So foods that are in their more natural state, okay? Means they're naturally higher in macronutrients, naturally higher in micronutrients, things like protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals. They're higher in volume, lower in calorie, et cetera, okay? So, and guess what happened? People started consuming fewer calories than their maintenance. So their body started to move toward a healthier body weight by losing fat in the process. So all that's to say, the big takeaway from that is that what's boring is true. And I mean that by, it's like, hey, what's the best health advice you could give? Focus predominantly on minimally processed foods. Okay, well, that doesn't seem very fun or sound very cool or cliche. Let's attack carbs. Let's drop sugar, or let's attack all this. Focus on predominantly minimally processed, whole, nutrient-dense foods. That is the most practical and yet powerful and seemingly simplistic, yet entirely robust advice that we could probably give. Focus on a wide array of minimally processed, mostly whole, natural, nutrient-dense foods, okay? And so what we teach is we teach the 4 pillars of nutrition. This is not a secret. This is not something that we uncovered. This is not a diet. This is simply when you take a look at what are the major foods that I should be stacking in my favor, we teach the 4 pillars. Pillar number 1, lean cuts of meat, seafood, poultry, and low or non-fat dairy. So lean meat, seafood, and dairy, okay? Number 2, the pillar is fruits and veggies, all of them. If they are safe for human consumption, eat all of them, okay? No, this one's not too high in sugar. This one doesn't have, no, none of that. Fruits and veggies. 3rd pillar, whole grains. Okay, so when and where possible, prefer whole grains. And then number 4, nuts and seeds, okay? So the answer to the question of, okay, Mark, then kind of what should we eat most of the time? 85, 90, 95% of the time. Still room for, more processed foods. That's okay. But in general, you want to be eating lean meat, seafood, and dairy, fruits and veggies, whole grains, nuts and seeds. Okay. So again, that was kind of the big idea, was reminding these doctors that Even if you're not counting calories, you're not taking a look at macronutrient distribution, you're not, optimizing things like protein or optimizing fiber, all sort of stuff. If people can eat as much as they want, again, per the study, and they are preferring or consuming mostly minimally processed foods, their body will begin to change. Their health impact, the health impact of consuming those foods, will start to more naturally work itself out. Doesn't mean it's the only thing you need to do. You can still overconsume those foods and gain weight. But what happens is the body tends to be satisfied, nourished, and you are less likely to overeat. So that's kind of my quick summary about that. Danielle, any thoughts on that portion? I know I kind of gone through the details, but again, like this is the simplicity of nutrition. I would say it's the beauty of nutrition, is that what has been true for all of human history is still true today, that food in its most natural form is still the best thing for us. Any thoughts on that?
No, you summed it perfectly.
And I did it again. I did that whole thing where I talk for so long and then I toss it to you and you're like, no, Mark, you said everything. I'm sorry.
You said it beautifully. No worries. You were going to get to cover that one. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So the next one too is on physical activity, right? And so there wasn't a ton focused on here, but I did think she brought up a great point. So Dr. Stanford said, and again, she's speaking to doctors, and she did challenge the doctors to not prescribe exercise for weight loss or for fat loss. That resonated massively with me. I tell people, if there's 87 reasons to exercise, 88 is to lose weight, right? Like it should be dead last. It should almost not even exist in your mindset. In fact, I work with people all the time to detach the weight loss process, even though they're coming to me for weight loss coaching. They're in a weight loss protocol. And we talk about exercise, and I tell them mentally, I want you to unhook your exercise from the weight loss process. Nutrition is going to do the work. We're going to exercise for all the other benefits of that enhance your life and cause you to flourish. Don't worry about exercise being a driving force of weight loss. These are my words, not the doctor's. Dr. Stanford said, don't prescribe exercise for weight loss so much as remember that exercise is about weight maintenance. And I do generally agree with that. I am all for exercise, all for strength training, hypertrophy training, all for cardiovascular training, fun sort of style training, whatever you like to do, stay active, stay active, stay active. Don't pursue fitness to lose weight. I would say that that's an unhealthy relationship with fitness. So all that said and done, she had mentioned that exercise should not be prescribed. And by the way, on average, exercise only accounts for 5% of calories burned in a day. And I can show you the study if you don't believe me. Okay, so on average, exercise only accounts for 5% of the calories that a human will burn in any given day with fitness, right? That assumes they're exercising. Okay. This is why it's so frustrating that people go into the gym and it's January and there's a lot of people in the gym that maybe weren't there in December, right? And they are working really, really hard. Their body's not changing. We're nearing the end of January and they're frustrated because they've been putting in the work at the gym, but they're not seeing the change in their body or in their health. Maybe they're feeling better, but maybe they're not losing weight. They're not losing fat. And I can tell you it's because they're putting so much focus on what could amount to only 5% of the calories that they burn that day. And they feel like that should be like 75% of the calories that they burn in a day. If I'm working out, of course I'm going to lose weight. It's not intended for direct weight loss. It can enhance that process. And trust me, there are a billion other reasons why you should work out. Losing weight is not, I would argue, one of them. So all that's to say, that was kind of in a nutshell, was the challenge to the doctors, was not to say like, hey, you need to start exercising more to lose weight, because then people go exercise and they don't lose weight. And so you've got to then balance the fact that 95% of those results are going to come from your normal metabolic processes and the food you put into your body. The other 5% from exercise, and yet there's this constant focus on exercises. That's how you lose weight. Okay. So I don't know if I summarized that well, but that was just kind of the one point on the physical activity. Any curious thoughts or anything on your end, Danielle?
I like to hear, what you say to your clients with that. I think I do mention that it does make it easier. I mean, if you're not moving, it is harder to lose weight. Yep. So it's just basically what I say is it increases your window of opportunity to lose weight. But I love how you said it's not a healthy relationship if you're using it for weight loss, because, the moment that you get a little plateau or you don't see the change, and maybe it is occurring, but you don't see it, then, you're mad at the exercise part. Yep. So I I agree. But yeah, I think it does make it easier, especially those people that can't move, that is making it harder for weight loss if there's
Yep,
physical limitations. So yeah.
certainly. And I know the next topic she talked about gets a little bit more under the hood, right? So I think the next one that I want to toss to you was the hormone consideration. Again, we could do entire episodes. We may have done one in the past on hormone, implications. So we're not going to get into some massive dissertation. It's not going to be, all encompassing by any means. But I'm curious your thoughts on, kind of what was said in terms of hormones. Maybe we could touch on genes after that as well.
Yeah. So she basically just talked about, the brain as being a big part of the puzzle of where, signals are happening and, receptors binding with neurons and transmitters and all those things, those fun words. So she specifically focused on the BDNF, which is the brain-derived neurotropic factor. And she talked about how high levels of that actually cause us to have a decrease in food intake and food storage. So leptin is a hormone that impacts appetite. So it's a satiety hormone. And so depending on so that leptin can bind on the receptor. So it's just basically like a little message train. And when that leptin binds, it stimulates the BDNF, the brain-derived neurotropic factor. And so high levels of that would mean we're satisfied, decreased food intake, and decreased food storage. But what she pointed out is when you have extra fat or adipose tissue, so when you have the extra adiposity, it actually goes a different route. That same hormone leptin binds to the similar receptive, but stimulates a different neuron in the brain. And that reduces the levels of the BDNF, which means it increases the food intake and the food storage. Mm-hmm. So in short, excess fat cells can send signals in the brain to increase food intake. So that is just a small little snapshot into the hormone impact. So not everything is in our control with obesity. So just taking that into consideration is one of those things that are not in our control, but we still don't want to just give up because of that information. And again, that's just a very small piece of that. She also went into like gene expression of TLL and CLL and how the TLL gives the high BDNF expression and the C gives the low BDNF expression or increased food intake. And so she kind of just pointed out the differences in ethnicities. So of African descent and Hispanic origin, they were more likely to have the C allele gene expression, which is the low BDNF, and that means the increased food storage and intake. So those were just, two snapshots of how the hormones and genes do impact obesity.
Yeah, and it was super heady. I mean, you did a great job summarizing because it was a deep part of the presentation for sure. And again, it's like, what does all that mean? There are things taking place under the hood. We have to acknowledge that, right? So it's not just about, eat less, move more. That's the binary, mantra you hear on TikTok these days, There is a level of truth, but there's a lack of nuance when you try to break things down to be that simple. But again, the point being, there are things you can control, and so that's really what you want to focus on. And that's where you want to put your effort into. And you want to release a little bit of that burden of I need to control all things or I'm going to control nothing. Right. And so controlling the controllables will make a massive difference for most people. Okay. So, yeah. So on the hormone side, the genetic side, super fascinating, super heady. Again, that's really getting into how the body works. And again, a great summary. And I thought too, she touched on sleep, which was interesting. So when I work through my clients, we have no less than kind of a 7-point protocol. Now I know that sounds overwhelming. The first 4 are related to their nutritional intake. The last 3 are related to activity and rest. And so we break it up, we make it very practical. But in my, weight/fat loss protocol that I work with clients, sleep is a part of that protocol. And sometimes that surprises people, a focus on sleep, but it's incredibly important, both for adults and children, both the quantity of sleep, the amount of hours, as well as the quality of that sleep. So we know as kids, they sleep a ton, they start to sleep a little bit less. But I think we just kind of want to continue that trend as adults, and we start thinking that 6 hours and 5 hours is healthier, enough, and we're being productive during the day. But the general recommendation for adults is 7 to 9 hours. Okay. And some people balk at that only because you've been sold a lie that, in order to be productive, you need to be up for 19 hours a day. And so sleep is incredibly important. I could show you a litany of studies that show that when you do get ample amounts of sleep or proper amounts of sleep, you have reduced cravings, you have reduced calorie intake, you have decreased insulin sensitivity. So you're more fortified against insulin sensitivity. You retain more muscle mass. They have higher metabolism. They've done these fascinating control studies where they see the impact of sleep on things like caloric intake, some of that signaling, that craving signaling, even the body's ability to hold on to certain tissue like muscle tissue is far more beneficial and possible with ample amounts of sleep, let alone all the other cognitive benefits, energy benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So she touched on that, which is super important. Again, I mean, if you're in a weight loss protocol and you don't have a focus on sleep, it's missing a huge component. And that was brought up in this forum of doctors. And I also love that she touched on, I think she called it circadian rhythm disruption. And so naps during the day, I think have a place. I've seen a lot of research in the neuroscience world about productivity, about short, what they call power naps. We're talking, 20 minutes in the middle of the day. But I think she's talking a little bit more about true circadian disruption, not just like focused and intense rest for a short period of time. And so fascinating that circadian rhythm, which is again, sort of that biological connection to, again, the rhythm of the sun, a rhythm of a day, light, dark, et cetera, is also key. And so I work with clients on that as well. And I do a bit of neuroscience protocol in the morning to help align my circadian rhythm. Very simply, if I was to give you a practical takeaway on that, general guidance would be to seek sunlight exposure within an hour of waking up. Okay. Now, if you wake up before the sun comes up, then the goal is to get sunlight exposure within an hour of the sun coming up. Okay. And what that does is, and I'm talking generally facing east, out there getting some sun on you, in your eyes, as Dr. Andrew Huberman would say, which are an extension of your brain. We're not looking at the sun, of course, right? We're not staring at the sun, but we are getting some sunlight first thing in the morning within an hour of waking up. And then also on the backside too, if you can, observe the sunset, which is not only romantic and good for your relationship, but it's also good for your circadian rhythm. Okay. So what that does, and it may sound weird, it may sound mystical, but simply observing the sun first thing in the morning, right? And then observing the sunset at night is one step to beginning to align your circadian rhythm. My clients have expressed that this starts to, because what I should have said is that observing that light first thing in the morning begins to set your circadian rhythm to fall asleep at least 14 to 16 hours later. Okay. So what it does is you set that up. You want to peak that exposure early so that your body starts a natural taper, and that starts to set the tone for better sleep. And then better sleep allows you to wake up refreshed. You get that sunlight. It sets the tone for better sleep. It becomes very circular. It's a good thing. Most people are in a spiral of over-caffeinated, right? Not enough sleep, over-caffeinated, not enough sunlight, terrible sleep, whether they realize it or not getting deep sleep, waking up, being tired, so more caffeine, right? And so it's this vicious cycle, and so this vicious spiral downward. And one of the ways you can reverse that is with sunlight viewing first thing in the morning within an hour of either the sun coming up or you getting up. And then if you can, I do the sunlight in the morning consistently, probably, 98% of the days in a year I'm doing that. I don't always get the sunset, but I definitely do the first thing in the morning. So I thought that was interesting. I was curious if you had any curious thoughts about the sleep side of things or circadian
Yeah.
disruption before we get to a couple practical strategies to help folks?
Yeah. So I think the point again, focus on what you can control. So some people have jobs where they're working nights, such
Mm-hmm.
as my sister. And so those things are not in your control if you're forced to be working at night. So
Mm-hmm.
focus on what you can control and getting good sleep when you are able to. And same with the child side of this. She showed a study about the long term impact of childhood sleep on obesity. So
Good point.
these participants were studied from ages 3 to 32. So that's really a long time. And the short sleepers were known to have a higher BMI over time. So sleep
Mm-hmm.
in childhood really does impact adulthood. And again, this is really hard for parents to hear because sometimes you don't have control over that. Like you can't force your children to fall asleep, and they there's multiple reasons why they may not be easy to put to bed or take naps or what have you. Just focus on what you can control. If it's really
Mm-hmm.
bad, get a sleep specialist for that. But knowing that your child's bedtime is important. And so that is something you can teach them early on, that it's not just now mom and dad have to get good sleep too. And that's what's important for our health as well. So I think it's another example of how the whole family is on the same,
Mm-hmm.
team accountability relationship where we, you know, don't get to stay up late because it's cool.
Yep.
It's just part of being a human. We need rest, and that's it. So, gotta stay healthy. So, yeah, I thought that was a really cool piece of information about childhood sleep.
Yep. Yep. Super important. And I at one point I can admit was terrible at this part in my life, and my results, my body composition, my mental, cognitive, stuff was not where it needed to be. And I didn't really realize it. I kind of had an ego coming out of the military about like, oh, I get more done and less sleep than most people do in a day with a full night's sleep. And I was like arrogant about it. Like I'm more productive by 9 a.m. than most people are in a whole day. But it was a disaster underneath the hood. So that's something that I've dramatically changed my opinion on, and the importance of sleep. And people are shocked when I'm like, oh yeah, 9 hours a night, like clockwork. They're like, what? I could never sleep that. I'm like, you should. So in sum, did you want to kind of summarize? I think I think she kind of had 5 major summary points in that, and then let's talk a couple practical strategies. You want to take those summary points?
um, let's see.
I
I'm
know we
not sure
both have
which
them in our
summary
notes. I'm
points
going to
you're
make you
talking about.
scan. Yeah. So like, let me tackle it. So I know they're in your notes somewhere. We had discussed real quick. So sorry about putting you on the spot. But
No.
so just 5 summary points, and any response that you have, Danielle, for sure. One, obesity is it's the most prevalent chronic disease. And we won't debate whether or not the term disease is applicable. I know that's a debate in nutrition circles and fitness circles. We're not here. That's outside of our scope to define whether it is or is not a disease. I, for one, have seen studies and research on both sides that when you declare something a disease, there's increased awareness, there's increased funding, there's increase for some people. They're more likely to then pursue health if they understand that it's a disease. I've also seen studies that say when you declare something a disease, people believe that they have no responsibility in it. There's nothing they can do. It's something that happened to them and they didn't choose it, and therefore there's nothing that they can do. And so we're not here to say whether or not it should be appropriately coined a disease. But that said, one of the summary points was that obesity is the most prevalent chronic disease in children and adults. Okay. So it is huge. And by the way, the number one cause of preventable death in America is heart disease. Number 2 is obesity and overweight. Okay. So it is number 2 to heart disease. And in terms of, I think, oh no, I'm sorry, smoking. So yes, heart disease is number 1 cause of preventable death. But when we take a look at preventable death, the number 1 cause is, sorry, not heart disease, it's smoking. And then obesity is number 2. Sorry, I was getting 2 charts that I look at consistently confused. So yes, heart disease is the number 1 cause of premature death, I should say. But in terms of preventable death, sorry, that's what I meant. Premature death. Number 1 cause of premature death is heart disease. Number 1 cause of preventable death is smoking. Number 2 is being overweight and obese. Okay. So it is highly problematic. It is highly, it is a vicious, it's a vicious condition. Okay. To say it clearly. Okay. So number 2, it's complex. I hope we've articulated just a summary of the complexity today. It requires multifactorial approach. Okay. And we understand that. We are also not proposing that we are experts in all of these. I'm not a geneticist, right? And so I'm not an endocrinologist, right? I am, certified nutrition science, understand, nutrition science, and as something that you can control, that's what we deliver for our coaching clients. Number 3 is that weight stigma, harms both physical and mental health. So we need to knock that off as a society. Okay. It is more complicated than just eat less and move more, right? Just be a better parent, just control it more, stop letting them have some, right? I think we all know how that plays out. Number 4 is that weight bias is seen as early as infancy. All right. We have to kind of check ourselves when we see that really young child with that parent. And perhaps they appear to be, overweight, obese. That bias begins really, really early. And we need to look at these things from a compassionate place, a heart of service, a heart of empathy, compassion for those folks, because it starts to impact that child, that human's life immediately. Okay. And last but not least, maternal and paternal anti-fat bias influences children. And we had talked about this real quick too, Danielle, kind of help articulate that anti-fat bias from both mom and dad side of things.
Yeah, so that's not just saying negative things about people that are overweight, but also saying only positive things about people that are of normal weight. So just watching your language at home and also everywhere, watching your language everywhere, so that you're, like you said, from love and compassion, and that this is a multifactorial. I think before we go, I want to also say, like, one of the controllables goes back kind of to that first point, as that first nutrition strategy that we gave you today is those 4 pillars. The key with that is variety, because the gut microbiome is one of those things that impacts obesity. So they was really interesting how she talked about how they were putting the microbiome samples in someone that was of normal weight into someone that was overweight, and saw a huge difference just with those bacteria in your gut. So the way you can help with that is, the American Gut Project with the 30 plus plants in a week. So that includes fresh herbs, not dried herbs, and all plant foods. And so count them up. I think it would be so fun. I actually started doing that one time, and it was fun to see how many plants you're getting in a day and how many plants you're getting in a week. And the variety is key, because if you're trying to feed a variety of different plants, you can't give them the same food. You have to give them all the different foods available. So, so that was one of the things you can control, since that's what we're talking about today. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And real quick, a couple practical strategies coming out of that as well is, so like you had said, focusing on those 4 pillars, focusing on a wide array of nutrient dense, whole, minimally processed foods, super important for adults and children. And by the way, another, I think, practical tip is don't focus on a restriction mindset. Don't suddenly go clean out the entire pantry of anything processed, right? Research has shown the more dramatic of those steps that you take, the less likely you are to succeed long-term, right? So don't come from a restriction mindset. I would say come from an abundance mindset. Instead of avoiding food, we want you to pursue food. We want you to pursue predominantly whole, minimally processed, lean meat, seafood, dairy, fruits and veggies, whole grains, nuts and seeds. We want you offensively pursuing those foods, not defensively just avoiding foods. Okay. And so what foods are you pursuing the majority of the time is a far better way to think about than are you making sure that you're avoiding, quote, bad food. And if you've been listening to us for any amount of time, we don't put food on a good to bad spectrum. We don't even put it on a healthy to unhealthy spectrum. It's nutrient dense to nutrient deficient. Okay. It's a sliding scale. So don't come from that restriction mindset. Also, as we mentioned, don't think that this problem will simply kind of work itself out. It takes focus. It does take controlling the controllables, which again has been the kind of the theme of the episode, right? So don't think that, especially with your children, that, well, it'll just kind of work out. They're still growing. Research does not support that assumption that it's just going to sort of get better on its own. There are things you can do. Of course, we're here to help if we can, but you as a parent have a huge impact on your child's life and their future in this regard. Okay. And then real practically, I would say encourage and participate. So you got to lead by example, parents. Encourage and participate in physical activity, right? Strength training, cardiovascular training, whether that's walking or biking or hiking, whether that's other activities that you find enjoyment in. Are you playing Frisbee on the weekends, at the park? Are you guys going for family walks? Are you swimming? Are you going to the pool? When you're on vacation, are you finding some free hiking trails nearby, right? Like encouraging and leading, because we've said this, I think, on the podcast before. Kids, it's more often caught than taught, right? So it's one thing to go to your kid and be like, you need to be more physical active. It's another thing to say like, hey, daddy's going out for a walk. You want to go? The more things are caught than taught. Okay. So encourage, both, a healthy pursuit of some of those foods we discussed. Encourage and participate in a healthy pursuit of physical activity that's fun. Find things that are enjoying. Don't do things that you hate because you think you need to. That's not going to be sustainable, right? And encourage quality sleep, both for yourself and for your family and for your kids. Like, kids need to see that bedtime is a thing both for them and for mom and dad. They need to see it. That's healthy. Be like, yep, it's bedtime. Daddy's got to work tomorrow. I got to I'm encroaching on my 7 to 9 hours right now. I got to turn the show off halfway through. It's bedtime. They need to see that. Chances are they're asleep before you, but still, they need to know that that's taking place. And again, I think in some, it's about, especially on the parent side, it's about leading by example. And so more things are caught than taught. Your kids are catching things every single step along the way, and that is amounting to the influence and the decisions that they will make that will guide them into their future. So if we can help in any way, we love walking through these considerations with people. Again, we're not here saying we're an expert on all things, but we are here on the nutrition side, the activity side, even some of the sleep and the circadian rhythm side. These are things that we love to work with clients on. And particularly Danielle on the family side, the holistic family approach is really one of your sweet spots. And that's what's so fun. Whereas I love working with usually individual adults and couples, that whole family approach is really your wheelhouse and something that is so important, so impactful. And as people are looking ahead, we're starting to wrap up January, as you're looking at what does 2024 look like. If we can help either on an individual level, a parent level, or a whole family level, please reach out to us and let us know. You can just head over to our website, peruse it there, get to know us a little bit better. It's Imago Nutrition. IMAGOnutrition.com. Okay, we've got a contact button right there in the upper right. Reach out to us, even if you just have questions, even if you just want to jump on a call and talk for 10 minutes. We just want to hear from you, understand what you're walking through, and how we can walk alongside you. So that's our whole heart. So with that, any final words from the amazing dietitian Danielle?
I would just say, I'm almost done with this program that I'm going to start in February. So it's all about those small maintainable steps for, your family, and how to talk to your children about it and how to lead by example. And, so if you want help with that, that's the goal, is that for it to be small, maintainable, consistent. So I think, please, look at our website for that. I'm hoping to be able to serve a lot of families that way.
Yeah, shoot us a note on that. And so that's a great point. And so and again, what I was saying in the background, I said huge, because small steps are actually huge steps, right? A lot of times we want to think about taking huge steps, but the program you're putting together, which people definitely need to reach out to us about. I've seen it on the back end. I've seen the architecture. It's new for us. It's going to be incredible for parents and for their entire family. But those small steps, what's huge is learning the small steps. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
huge. And so
Yeah.
if that at all resonates with you, again, head over to imagonutrition.com, click, the contact button, or go to the About Us page. You can go to the About Us page and then actually click right on, contact Danielle, and that'll shoot a contact form to her directly. So, but even if you come to me and you mention, the family program, I will quickly CC Danielle and we will get back to you immediately, because it could be an incredibly powerful 2024 for you. So with that, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast. Hope this has been helpful. I know it's been not in a bad sense. I know it's been a little dense. It's been thick. I mean, this has been a bit more like a steak dinner, to be honest. But I hope it's encouraging. As again, our goal was to help understand that while we can't control all things, there are things we can control, and that is possible. So, we'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified of upcoming episodes. Drop us a review. Let us know how we're doing, and share it with a friend. We'd love to help as many people as possible for free. You can also follow us on social media. We're across all the major social media platforms at Imago Nutrition. That's IMAGO Nutrition. And as always, thanks to Happy Pill the band for our theme song, Think About Food. We'll see you.